Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. What if I told you the same skills you use to analyze a Vermeer painting could help you solve your organization's most stubborn challenges? That is the ability to truly see, not just look, but observe with precision, and how it could transform how you approach problems, managing teams, and navigating uncertainty. Today, I'm happy to be joined by Amy Herman, a lawyer turned art historian who has cracked the code on something extraordinary. She's discovered that art can teach us to become better problem solvers, more perceptive leaders, and sharper critical thinkers. Amy's revolutionary approach, called the art of perception, has been quietly transforming how some of the world's top organizations operate. Her method is deceptively simple, but yet profoundly powerful. By teaching people how to look closely at paintings, sculptures, and photography, she helps them develop what she calls visual intelligence, the ability to recognize the most pertinent information, spot hidden details, and identify the biases that often cloud our judgment. She's also the New York Times bestselling author of two of my favorite books, Visual Intelligence, Sharpen Your Perception, Change Your Life, and Fixed, How to Perfect the Fine Art of Problem Solving. In our conversation today, we're going to explore how knowing how to see can revolutionize your approach to challenging things, both big and small. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. Welcome to the program, Amy.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
My first question to every one of my guests is, have our listeners learn more about you, your work, and really what got you into this?
Sure. Well, I always start sort of tongue in cheek and say that I am a recovering attorney. I like to get that out of the way because I think the work that I do is really an amalgamation of the two disciplines that I work in, legal analysis and visual analysis. Even though I am not a practicing lawyer anymore, that's where I started. But I always had a passion and a love for art history. Even since I was a child, I loved going to museums. I loved looking at paintings. And it took me a long, circuitous route to get there. But I like to believe that I've been able to combine each of those practical aspects, legal analysis and visual analysis, into a professional development program that is sector agnostic, that I can use across the professional spectrum to not only help people be more effective in the work that they do, but engage in their worlds. And I find that art, because it's so powerful, I'm channeling the power of art for people who would have never thought to look at works of art to help them do their jobs more effectively.
Well, let's start with, how do you personally define visual intelligence, and why do you believe it's essential to success in modern life, regardless of one's background or profession?
Visual intelligence for me, it's been an evolving definition. And what I tell people, regardless of their professional discipline, visual intelligence is seeing what's there that other people don't, seeing what's not there that other people should, seeing the positives, the negatives, the upside, the invention, the opportunity, the warning sign, the quickest way, the way out, and the win. And the reason I put it that way in that sort of package is because those are skills that leaders across the board need to do. They need to be able to see what's there. They need to be able to see what's not there. And what undergirds all of visual intelligence is the ability to communicate effectively what it is that we see, what it is that we observe, and what it is that we perceive. And so it's effective communication and really, really honing our visual intelligence, which is that umbrella over all those things I just said.
Why does art offer a safe space to sharpen observation, perception, and your communication skills? Because it's not obvious right away why we should be looking at pieces of art to help our observation skills.
That is precisely the reason it's a safe space. I always say that looking at art with me or looking at art with your colleagues or with your friends is a non-threatening way that lays bare all the things we're doing wrong. When, for example, if you have two people standing in front of a painting and I say to both of them, I want you to tell me what's going on here. Tell me what you see. And I will hear two entirely different versions of what they perceive is happening in the painting. And I say to them, it's really fine to have those differences with me in front of this painting. But when you're in the boardroom, the courtroom, the operating room, you can't have those kind of discrepancies. And if you do, you need to be able to really isolate them and solve the problem. And so art offers us this non threatening opportunity. And the other reason that I think art is such a powerful vehicle to do this is because everybody sees something. Nobody's going to stand in front of a work of art and say, well, I don't know what I'm looking at. Well, do you see blue? Do you see green? Do you see sunshine? Do you see rain? It puts us all at a level playing field. And there are very few things in our world that put us all on a level playing field. And so it's not threatening. There's a lot of laughter in my sessions because people hit themselves in the head and say, how did I miss that? We can laugh about it because it's a painting, but nobody's laughing in the real world when you make a really crucial mistake or you miss something that's critical. And I want to teach people to go back, look again, and be able to communicate effectively what they see and what they're not seeing.
I agree with you, and you're right. Art stands still, it never walks away, evolves, giving us the luxury to examine it from every angle, practice close observation, and really analyze the meaning free from these high stakes consequences that many leaders and managers find themselves in every day. And yet our brains are hardwired to gloss over the familiar, missing details hidden in plain sight. So we really need to train ourselves to observe in context the art, which helps that transfer to happen for us to pay attention to everyday situations and see the extraordinary in the ordinary.
That's exactly what we're looking for. And to your point, sometimes I have people that have all different kinds of relationships with art. I'll have some doctors who are art collectors, or I have people who say, I hate modern art. None of that matters. And if someone says, well, I'm an expert in 19th century painting, I will say to them, that's not relevant here. This is not about substantive expertise. This is about looking and being able to communicate what you see. And I'm using art as the vehicle to do that. So it's not about substance, Manet versus Monet, or when did Vermeer paint? I'm not teaching that. But the other very quiet subtext that happens during my sessions, there is this empathetic, inspirational moment where people realize everything we're looking at was created by human beings. And somehow it underscores this: we all have the potential to be creative. We all have the potential to be innovative, to see things, to create things. And it's quite humbling. Art is very powerful in that way. While it's certainly not the primary goal for people to realize, wow, somebody created that, it's this quiet subtext that lurks in the background that everything we're looking at was not created by AI, it was created by the human mind dictating to the human hand. And that's pretty powerful in and of itself.
What inspired the creation of your art of perception framework? It's four stages, and maybe you can just give us a high level overview of each stage: the assess, analyze, articulate, and adapt stages.
Yes. So as I was developing the program had its roots in medicine. When I started the program, I was the head of education at the Frick Collection here in New York City. And I can't take credit for the creation of this program. They were doing it at Yale University. But the program had parameters. It had very, very definitive parameters. The idea was, let's take medical students out of the clinical setting, out of the hospital, out of the medical school, bring them to an art museum, teach them to analyze works of art. So when they go back to the clinical setting, they'll be better, hopefully, better observers of and communicators with their patients. That was the idea: humanities and medicine. So when I learned about Yale's program, I called my colleague, my counterpart at the Yale Center for British Art, and I said, I've heard you're doing this wonderful thing. She said, come on up, come see it, because there's a lot of collegiality in museums. So I took the train to New Haven. I saw her program. And on the way back, I thought, how can I do this in New York and not look like I stole the program from Yale? So, with Yale's very gracious permission, we started a version of it in New York City with Cornell Medical School. And it went beautifully. The exact paradigm at Yale worked very well in New York. But what I realized probably 3 or 4 years into the program, and it expanded to other medical schools, what I realized very quickly is there's a much greater application for this program outside of medicine. There are many other professional applications. And that's when I came up with the model. I said, I have to come up with a succinct model, because if I'm going to expand this outside of medicine, I have to tell people, why is it valuable? Why is it new? Why is it valuable? And that's when we came up with the 4 A's. So across professions, whether you are in law enforcement or the intelligence community or in medicine or an analyst or a data researcher, everyone practices 4 A's: new crime, new tumor, new litigation, new conflict. First, you have to assess your situation. Everyone has to step back and say, okay, what's happening here? Let's articulate what's happening. Then we have to analyze it. We say, well, what information do we have? What don't we have? What am I missing? And how do I prioritize what I have? Then we have to articulate it. We have to share it with our colleagues and with our stakeholders. And that can take a lot of forms. That can be a meeting, a memo, an email, a text. For some cops, it's on the radio. How do I articulate this? And the fourth A, it's two A's. It's adapt or act. You either adapt your behavior to the information you have, or you act and you make a decision. So assess, analyze, articulate, and act becomes this very succinct, very doable, and really my overarching goal across these professions and across both books also is to shift default thinking. I don't want anyone to stand back and say, now, what did Amy Herman tell me to do? I want to make this automatic so that when you enter into any unfamiliar situation, any conflict, any new environment, you're going to say, all right, let me start by looking at what I have. Let me think about it. Let me talk about it. And then this is how I'm going to base my decision. So we don't have to go through this process. I want to shift default thinking. And that's how the model emerged, thinking not just for medicine, but across the professional spectrum.
Well, and shifting that default thinking is so critical on building a habit so that you don't have to deliberately, actively process these steps each and every time. It takes practice. I've gone through visual intelligence many times. I feel like I'm farther along the path. I'm not sure if it's the default setting yet, but it's getting closer.
Well, the good news for you is nobody ever masters this. It's always a work in progress. But having those four A's and shifting your default thinking, now it gets, whenever there's a problem in my family jokes with me and says, you're the one that wrote a book about fixed. Well, let's fix this. And I do go through a methodology, and it has really become the go-to for me. We can solve almost anything. It's just a matter of how do we look at it and how do we communicate it?
I love that. Well, can you share some examples of how practicing active observation, not passive seeing, has revealed overlooked opportunities or prevented costly errors, either in art or in professional contexts?
Absolutely. We start with the premise that no two people see anything the same way. And you have to remember that there are two words that I don't allow in my sessions. I don't allow people to use the words obviously and clearly. And I have this it's a reprimand that if anybody does use that word, I make the whole room applaud. And I'm not trying to be irreverent. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just want to remind you, why don't I want you to use the words obviously and clearly? Because we live and work in a complex world. Nothing is obvious and even less is clear. So rather than saying, well, obviously, we have a case of X here, I would prefer that you say, I believe we have a case of X because of Y and Z. And so what it forces us to do is to be more intentional in the words that we choose, in how we choose to articulate. So by doing that, there's less chance that you're going to overlook something, because when you communicate to someone, well, this is what I see, someone's going to say, but did you consider this? And did you think about that? And what undergirds again this idea of using observation is to remember not only that no two people see anything the same way, but that things hide in plain sight. And that by soliciting multiple perspectives, let's be selfish here. I say this very selfishly. Multiple perspectives make for better decision making. And so it's never just about the way you see it. It's never just about the way I see it. And true leaders want to solicit multiple perspectives because in the end, multiple perspectives make for better decision making.
I love the quote that you put in the book from Sir Isaac Newton stating, if I've ever made any valuable discoveries, it's been owed to a more patient attention than to any other talent. And there's a difference between passive sight and active assessment because most people, right, see, but they don't observe because we have so many perceptual filters and biases that we have to overcome, from inattentional blindness to the confirmation bias that shape how we notice certain things. Perhaps you can go through a few of the more common ones and maybe ways in which we can overcome one or two of them.
Sure. One of the things that I want to start with when it comes to biases, first of all, everyone has them. Not all biases are negative, but I also I can't change people's biases. I can make them aware of them. And the value in being aware of your bias is those to that shifting of your default thinking. Okay, I know that I always see certain situations this way, and I need to step back and look at the bigger picture. So by making people aware of their own biases, they can almost self-correct. So one of the examples I'll give you is the anchor bias. And the anchor bias is a powerful one, especially in times of exigent circumstances or critical incidents or times of crisis, because people want to hold on to something. They want someone to tell them it's going to be okay, here's the direction. And the anchor bias means that it's the tendency to believe the first thing you hear or see is true. And it can get us into a lot of trouble. The anchor bias can really not only dictate our actions, but it can lead us down the wrong road. We call it in learning a language, we we call it a false friend when you think something is really beneficial, but it's not. And here's an example that I'll give you. Um, I had the I was unfortunately in New York City on 9/11. We saw many different sides of humanity. And I remember walking home because public transportation was not running. And on every corner, someone stopped and begged. I was walking with a colleague, begged us, would we give blood? Would we give blood? They said there's a desperate need for blood. Well, I didn't because I had to get home. I had to find out what was happening at home and I had to get to my family. There was no need for blood. They did not have a blood shortage. They did not have an overwhelming need for blood. And yet it was communicated. And there were Red Cross stations and there were people on every corner. We must get blood. And I thought, that's an anchor bias. Somebody hears it and we want to hold on to something. And so it's not just in times of crisis. We have to remember to say, okay, this is what I've heard, but I need to get everyone's opinion. I need to find out the facts. It's a way to put yourself in check. Because as you said before, we want to make sure we're not overlooking things. And multiple perspectives help us to do that and talking to other people.
What I found too, which is also mentioned in the book, even by asking certain questions, what am I tuning out? What am I taking for granted? Because your personal experiences, like your geographic background, your professional ambitions, your moods, they act as invisible filters. And the key to surface these assumptions is before concluding or speaking, use some reflective questioning techniques and feedback from others to uncover those blind spots.
I can give you a really simple one, and I love this one because it applies to almost everyone. Everyone knows if they're a morning person or an evening person, but we rarely know that about each other other than the people we live with. And if you know that you make better decisions after your first cup of coffee in the morning, that's when you should be making your hardest decisions. And if you're making decisions at the end of the day and you're frazzled and you're thinking about your next thing, that is the kind of awareness we need to have about ourselves. And while it's not a bias, it's a filter on our ability to see, our ability to communicate, and our ability to make the best decisions. So, knowing your biases, knowing yourself, this idea of self perception is really so important. And as you're seeing, my books don't provide answers. What I hope is that my books provide a framework for us to ask better questions of our colleagues, of our work, and of ourselves.
And many people feel that they're self aware, but very few people are.
Most of us are not, and we live in the illusion that we are. And it's a hard pill to swallow when someone tells you something about yourself that you would have never thought before. That's why I think feedback and evaluations are on a regular basis are invaluable. And it's part of our self-awareness and self-perception because I think that's what keeps our eyes open is when we are self-aware and when we get information from other people because as I said before, it's never all about the way we see it. Multiple perspectives make for better decisions.
One perception is different than true observation, and the powers of observation can be developed through various habits. You
Mhm.
mentioned a simple one that you can do every day, cultivating the habit of just watching with an active, inquiring mind, training your observation skills in the same principles as training any other activity. But at first, you mentioned, which is true for any habit that you want to develop, you have to do things more consciously and laboriously, but eventually it'll become more unconscious and ingrained in you. So, provide us some practical steps of how do we do that to make our observations more objective and precise.
Absolutely. I'm going to admit and be fully transparent that the presence of our screens and our phones really competes with our ability to observe. I'm the first to say that. But one of the simplest exercises that I give people to do is, and it doesn't take a lot of energy, is most people have a routine. Every day they go from point A to point B. Even if we work from home, even if we do, we all go from point A to point B. And what I ask the participants in my sessions afterwards, they say, well, how can I practice this? I say every day, when you're going from point A to point B, you're going to work, coming home from work, taking the dog for a walk, taking a child to school. Notice one thing that you didn't notice the day before. Just one thing. Go out of your way, have the intention to say, I'm going to notice something today that I didn't see before. And what happens is you train your brain to start looking automatically. And you may say, well, who cares? Well, I'd rather be tuning out and listening to music. Situational awareness, personal situational awareness, professional situational awareness is critical. It's critical to our growth. It's critical to our safety. It's critical to our engagement. And that one simple exercise of noticing one thing different every day. Like today, I had to go to the doctor. The doctor is 35 blocks from where I live. I decided to walk. I usually take the bus. I thought, you know what? It's warm out. I'm going to walk. So many things that I saw. Are they things that I absolutely need to know? No, but I'm sharpening my specific observation with intention as I'm going on this new route. Instead of taking the bus down one avenue, I wove in and out of the streets and I got to the doctor a different way. And it enables me to broaden my own vision so that when I have a problem to solve, those muscles are active.
I've also done another exercise in the book a lot where you can just practice with a single everyday object like a watch, handbag, or a water bottle. Select something with a lot of detail, study it for a full minute, then cover it, put it away, and write down as many details as you can. Retrieve the object and observe the object 3 or 4 times just to see what you might have missed, but also make sure that you quantify when possible. Use numbers, colors, locations, because what I see myself in doing a lot, and I assume a lot of other individuals do the same, is they use subjective language, loaded adjectives. Instead, use comparative nouns like you recommend. It smells like fish instead of just it's a bad smell.
It stinks. To one person isn't necessarily stinky to somebody else.
But it's so hard to separate what you observe factually versus those that are laced with opinions, inferences, subjective inferences that you just don't even realize you're saying.
But what you say is so true because we all have the subjective ability to describe something. But when you do it with intention again, and one of the things I say about communication, it's not just what you have to say, is how is it being heard? I catch myself. If I say to someone, well, this smells bad, I don't like the smell of freshly mowed grass. Some people love it. So for me to say, it smells out here, I have to remember it doesn't smell to everyone. And we have to remember what has a positive connotation and what has a negative connotation. And what this forces us to do, and it sounds like so much work, it's part of that shifting your default thinking, is to be as precise and objective as possible in everyday communication so that when it really matters in exigent circumstances, problem solving, or crisis, you're able to do it without having to think. It will automatically happen. And so, how we choose to communicate, how do we articulate the problem? How do we articulate where we are, what's happening, what's on your mind? It's engaging in a kind of neuroplasticity. You're training your brain to do it. So, when it needs to do it automatically, those cells are there. It's already done it. And that's really what I'm aiming for. And so, by doing it every day in this non threatening, using art as the mechanism to say, well, what's going on in this picture? One example I'll give you, and I love this one. It's a painting at the Frick collection. It's Christ chasing the money changers out of the temple. And I don't often use religious paintings, and this one isn't about the religion, but you've got the Christ figure in the center, and you have the sinners and the believers, and it's all these bright colors. And I had a group of counterterrorism officials in front of the painting, and I said, what's going on here? And I loved the response that I got. One of the people on the team said, you see that guy in pink? He's causing all the trouble. Collar him. Put a collar on him. And in no way did he know he was talking about the Christ figure. To him, that person was causing the chaos. Get handcuffs on him so we can start to diffuse the situation. And so by bringing our experience to the narrative of art, we're able to engage the skills we have and think about how we have to expand them, rethink them, and get better at them.
Well, you also emphasize that familiarity can breed blindness. And you highlight this in the book. One of the paintings, Mrs. Winthrop, I believe, shows the significance of the mahogany table analogy. How does that illustrate the dangers of missing crucial details hidden in plain sight?
Well, I'm going to do my best to describe this painting. This is an 18th century American painting by John Singleton Copley of a woman named Mrs. Winthrop, Mrs. Hannah Winthrop. And there she is sitting, and it's a very, I wouldn't say a grand portrait, but it's painted in great detail. She has a bonnet, and she has a bow, and she has dimples, and she has necklaces, and pearls, and lots of chins, and she's wearing a blue silk dress, and she's sitting in an upholstered chair. And I asked the group to look at the painting of Mrs. Winthrop, and I surmise that if I had the opportunity to ask everyone in the room to describe this lovely portrait of Mrs. Hannah Winthrop, I believe that more than half the people in the room would not even mention this mahogany table that's at the very bottom of the painting. Now, mind you, it's at the bottom, probably 1/10 of the painting, but it's what we call a tour de force in art. It is a spectacular rendering of a mahogany table. It has a reflection on the top, and you can see the reflection of her fingers, and you can see her hands and the lace on her dress. The natural reaction is, who cares about a mahogany table? This portrait is about Hannah Winthrop. Who cares about the dumb table? And the point I want them to take away is that that table is hiding in plain sight. It's right there for everyone to see, and our eyes go right to the subject, and we do not look below the subject. And it's a reminder to all of us that when things hide in plain sight, we could be missing critical information. Am I suggesting that the table is critical? No. But I'm saying that so many things happen in our everyday life, in our speed, in our ability to get things done, that we miss what's hiding in plain sight. I don't worry about her table. I use the example of when my son is looking for something in the refrigerator and he says, Mom, we're out of mayonnaise or we're out of peanut butter. And I say, No, it's on the second shelf in the refrigerator where it's been for the 10 years we've been in this apartment. And he takes everything out and puts it back in. And then I go into the refrigerator and help him. And it's right where I said it would be. Why? Because we don't see what we're looking for. We're looking so hard that we're missing what's right in front of us. And my answer to this mahogany table problem is effective communication. When you ask other people, well, what do you see here? Someone will say, Did you catch that table at the bottom? And you'd say, That table, I didn't even see it. Once again, multiple perspectives make for better decision making. And the other way to make sure that we don't trip over those mahogany tables is in difficult situations, sensitive situations, problematic situations, pull a colleague aside and say, Look, this is what I'm dealing with. This is the problem. This is how I hope to fix it. And then you ask a hard question. You say, Is there anything here I'm missing? Anything I'm not seeing? And you will be amazed at what you hear. Why? Because no two people see anything the same way. And when I'm in a sticky situation, I certainly want to hear what other people have to say to make sure that I'm not missing anything critical. So tripping over mahogany tables, everyone does it, but there is a way around it.
Well, and you have a strategy too to combat those unintentional visual lapses, and it's a memorable mnemonic called Cobra. Perhaps you could unpack that for our listeners and just what strategies from this framework had the biggest impact on leaders and learners? And can you share maybe a memorable story from that?
The thing about the cobra analogy that really sticks in my mind, the biggest one, that and having worked with this framework over many years, camouflage, knowing that things hide in plain sight, because I have seen I published this book in 2016. It's now 9 years later. And things have gotten faster. We have more information. We have artificial intelligence. And the two ideas of knowing that things camouflage and knowing that we have to take a break, and that means literally and figuratively stepping back from something visually and sometimes even stepping away. Those are two valuable things that we don't do enough of. We think things are going to be apparent because we all have shorter attention spans and we're not willing to look for something that is camouflaged. And we're also not always willing to step away and step back because we have very short attention spans. And so I worry about that, but I encourage people. There's a name for this. Taking a break, well, there's a Latin phrase that it's a hat tip to my colleagues at the FBI who taught me festina lente. It means to make haste slowly. And what that means is slow down to speed up. And when you slow down and you can put that Cobra methodology into practice, you realize that things are camouflaged, things are overlooked. We have to take a break. We have to reset. It's a way of thinking, but remembering to step back. Festina lente, to make haste slowly, to slow down. One more point I want to add. I did a presentation in Japan last November and it was virtual. And I was worried because it was 10 o'clock at night for me. It was being simultaneously translated and I'm showing works of art. And I'm thinking, how is this going to land? And one of the participants sent me a DM when it was over. And this is what he said. He said, Your concept of festina lente, we have it in Japan. He said, a 16th century samurai once said, This is urgent. Do it slowly. And I'll never forget that. This is urgent. Do it slowly. So it's a matter of looking more carefully, stepping back, resetting, and assessing. And it can be done. I'm not asking you to step away for 24 hours, but it goes back to that default thinking. How can I put this methodology of problem solving, make it automatic?
That's a great phrase. I have to remember that one. Because I have found that the more unfamiliar the territory you traverse, the more potential there is for you to refocus your perceptions and break out of what you call and what other people call fixedness. or the habit of seeing things only from one perspective, which is so common in problem solving as well as in our observations. And you also mentioned use all of your senses to develop a full picture. We normally avoid those and focus on just the visual or the auditory part of what we're trying to see or understand.
Well, they give us so much information. The way I outline it for my participants, I say these are powerful resources and assets that you have at your fingertips, literally and figuratively. And the way I describe it, I say perceptions are informed by observations of the five senses. What something smells like, looks like, sounds like. And if you're able to describe perceptions that are informed by observations of the five senses, inferences are informed by perceptions. So when you're going to make a conclusion or you're going to render a judgment on something, you need to be able to point to the perception that got you to that and what observations from your five senses informed that perception. And so it goes back to when we were talking about the house smelled bad. When I'm training inspectors, people that are going into the home looking for child abuse, making sure the children are healthy, and someone goes in and says, well, the house smelled bad. Is that a smell of drugs? Is that a smell of garbage rotting? Is that just an unpleasant smell? We need to be specific. And as you said, we default to our own filters, and we have to remember there are many other filters through which we need to see things.
And you give three questions that frame ambiguity that I'd love for you to unpack, because I think leaders, listeners of any type can use these three questions to really drive clarity and action in uncertain business challenges. So perhaps unpack those and let us know how they can be used.
Well, I'm going to confess with those three questions have evolved. The three questions to ask in any situation where we have ambiguity, we have any kind of problem, something unfamiliar. The first one you say, what do I know? What do I definitively know about this situation? Number two, what don't I know? And people say, well, how do I know what I don't know? Identify what's missing from your analysis. I don't have X, Y, and Z. And then three, if I had the opportunity to get one piece of information, it's not what do I need to know, it's what do I need to ask. And that's how I've evolved it. Instead of trying to identify what do I need to know, I don't know what I need to know, but how can I frame that? What do I need to ask? And what that goes to is training your brain again, trying to shift the default thinking to better critical inquiry. Because if I don't have the information that I need, I better be able to ask for it. And I can't ask in ambiguous terms. And so frequently leaders get the information, they're at the end of the problem, and they need to step back. And one of the things I was going to bring in the conversation, so glad you asked the question, is the idea of buckets. Let's put our information in buckets because we are all overwhelmed. And the sooner we can put things in buckets, the easier it will be to find an answer or come to a consensus or come to an agreement. What do I know? What don't I know? And if I have the opportunity to get more information, what do I need to ask?
And be careful too of those urgent concerns that scream for our attention, but they usually offer only short term solutions. I have found important things contribute value in the long run, while sometimes urgent tasks, although they're important, more often the urgent obscures the important. Have you found that to be the case?
Yes, but it's very natural. It's the human condition. And I think that we have this response. We know what we do in an emergency, we know what we do when there's a crisis. But to be able to get better in those situations, we need to be able to step back from those situations. And to go back to that festina lente, it's an investment of time. And there's a great competition for our time and our attention. And I realize what I'm asking people to do, it sounds so simple. It has to be done with intention. You have to think about what you're asking, thinking about what you have, and making sure that you are communicating what you see and what the problem is. Many, many things are asked of leaders, and if they can effectively communicate what they see, what they don't see, and how to delegate and say, I don't have this information, but I need you to get it. And it means going out of your comfort zone all the time, but that's why leaders are leaders.
Is there one practical takeaway from your book, Visual Intelligence, that you would love for leaders, for the listeners of this podcast, to start implementing right away to improve their observation skills?
Yes, I want them to know that going into every single situation, there are things that are hiding from them. There are things that are hiding in plain sight that they are not seeing. So if you go into every situation, and I'm not suggesting having a lack of confidence, it actually gives you confidence knowing that you are going into every new situation to be able to communicate what you see, to ask about what's missing. It goes back to my original definition of what visual intelligence is, and to be able to talk about the warning signs, because you have to know that what you see is not what everyone else sees. And the responsibility is yours to say what you see. And that we have to really get rid of the assumptions. We have to put them to bed that everybody sees what we do. And if I can just make people understand that the way they see it is not the way everybody else does, and it's their responsibility to communicate their version of their observations. The one example I'll give you here is years ago, before I started doing this full time, I worked for an organization, and the head of my department, there were 10 of us in the department, and he said, "We need to solve this department's problem. We cannot go another day. We're having a meeting today at 1 o'clock. We have to solve the problem." Well, he got all 10 of us in a room and he said, "Before I tell you what I want to do, I want to go around the room and I want each of you to say what your version of what the problem is." Do you know there were 10 problems voiced at the table? Nobody came to the meeting with the idea of solving the same problem. And unless we articulate what we observe, we're going to keep going forward. And then it's just, we're going down the wrong road, and we're going to end up going down a rabbit hole. So that good communication of observation and perception every step of the way is what I want leaders to take away from that book.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.